The wind tore through the canyon like a scream that had lost its way home. Snow lashed against the wreck of a wedding wagon half buried in white, its wheels split, lantern swinging by a single nail. Ribbons once meant for celebration hung frozen and stiff, clinging to the wood like veins of a dead dream. Near the fence post, a figure in a torn gown shivered, a bride left tied up, a burlap sack drawn tight over her head. Her breath came in thin, ragged bursts. The night had been long and she had run out of prayers hours ago. Beneath the sack, her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing one last word she couldn't even hear herself say. Far across the valley, a lone rider cut through the storm, his horse steaming under the weight of cold. He rode like a man with nowhere to be and too much behind him to turn back. His name didn't matter to anyone out here. Names had a way of getting buried faster than bodies. What mattered was the way his shoulders carried the past, heavy, unspoken, and dangerous. The wind drove needles of snow into his face, but he didn't flinch. He saw the faint, dying glow of a lantern through the white haze and pulled his horse toward it. When he reached the wagon, he dismounted, boots sinking deep into the drift. The snow muffled everything, even the sound of his breath. At first he thought the bundle tied to the post was a corpse. Then it moved. He dropped his reins and cut the rope binding her wrists. Her body slumped forward, weak and cold as stone. He tore the sack from her head and froze. Beneath the frost, bruises, and dirt, her face wasn't monstrous. It was delicate, ghostly, with eyes fluttering like the last light of a candle. The world called her cursed, but what he saw was someone life had simply forgotten to be kind to. "Easy," he muttered, voice low and hoarse. He wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders. Her skin felt ice-burned, her fingers stiff as bone. She looked up at him for a moment, pupils wide, dazed. "Please," she whispered, barely audible, "don't send me back." He didn't ask where back was. The look in her eyes was answer enough. He lifted her into his arms and placed her across his horse like something too fragile to belong to this world. The storm swallowed their tracks as he rode toward the dark line of pines on the horizon. His cabin lay somewhere beyond them, half-rotten but dry, a place made for a man who didn't expect company. Tonight, though, that solitude cracked. By the time they reached it, the storm had turned into a blinding wall of white. He pushed open the crooked door and carried her inside. The place smelled of leather, wood smoke, and loneliness. A small fire struggled in the hearth, hissing as snow melted off his coat. He set her on the bed, tore an old blanket from the shelf, and laid it over her. Her hands were blue. He rubbed them, trying to coax life back into them, cursing under his breath at how light she felt. When her eyes opened again, the room was glowing with firelight. She stared around in confusion, then at the stranger beside her. "Where am I?" she murmured. "Somewhere the wind don't reach," he said, crouched near the fire. "You were half dead when I found you." "I was supposed to be," she said quietly, and the fire popped as if punctuating her words. He studied her face, how the shadows caught the bruise on her cheekbone, how fear still clung to her even now. "Who did this?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Doesn't matter. They don't care if I'm alive. Neither should you." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Then I guess I'm already making mistakes." She watched him tend the fire, his movements steady but heavy with fatigue. His hands were calloused, the kind that had held guns more often than kindness. Yet when he handed her a cup of hot water, he did it like someone afraid she might break. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind clawing at the door. She sipped, the warmth returning color to her lips. "Why help me?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, "Because once someone helped me when they shouldn't have." Her gaze softened. She wanted to ask who, but something in his eyes warned her not to. Instead, she closed hers and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, almost to himself, and added a log to the fire. The flames leapt, throwing light across the walls, across the gun hanging by the window, and the old photograph pinned beside it. A woman and a child, faces faded by time. He looked at it for a moment too long, jaw tightening. Hours passed. The storm eased. She slept. He sat in the chair across from her, rifle leaning against his leg, every creak of the wind pulling his gaze to the door. When he finally rose to check outside, he noticed something in the snow beyond the porch, footprints. Not his, not hers. He stood there a while, snow melting on his hat brim, watching the ridge. Nothing moved. But the feeling settled in his gut like a loaded chamber. Whoever left her out there might come looking. He shut the door softly and turned back toward the sleeping figure on the bed. She stirred, murmuring something he couldn't make out. Her hand slipped from the blanket, pale and small, resting near the edge of the bed. He picked up the torn ring that had fallen from her finger earlier, placed it beside her hand and whispered, "You'll keep this till you decide you don't need it anymore." Outside, the last of the storm broke apart, revealing a slice of moonlight over the ridge. The cabin glowed faintly in the snow, a lonely ember against the wilderness. Inside, the cowboy sat back down, eyes still on the door, knowing dawn would bring questions neither of them were ready to answer. But for now, in that fragile quiet, two lost souls were still breathing, and that was enough to keep the story alive. Morning seeped through the cracks of the shutters, painting thin bars of gold across the cabin floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt sacred. The woman stirred under the blanket, her eyes fluttering open to the smell of smoke and coffee. The cowboy sat near the fire, coat draped over a chair, steam rising from a tin mug in his hands. His face looked carved from the same wood as the cabin itself, hard, lined but not unkind. When their eyes met, she flinched, half expecting cruelty, half remembering mercy. He nodded once, like a man greeting a memory. "You're awake." She pushed herself up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. The dress she wore was torn at the seams, lace stiff with frost and dirt. "You kept me alive," she said softly. "I don't much like burying strangers," he replied, though his tone carried a flicker of warmth. Her gaze wandered over the room. The rifle by the door, the pair of boots drying near the fire, the single photograph nailed to the wall. A woman and a child. She wondered if they were ghosts or reasons. "You live here alone?" she asked. He gave a short nod. "World's quieter that way." She hesitated, then said, "You could have left me." "Could have," he agreed, "but didn't." The air thickened between them. She studied him with careful curiosity, as though afraid to look too long. His movements were deliberate, silent, but something about his posture suggested he was used to being hunted. She recognized that kind of stillness. It belonged to survivors. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled. He caught her without thinking, strong hands steadying her shoulders. The touch startled them both. She smelled of snow and faint lavender beneath the grime, a scent that made him forget the years between now and tenderness. She pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm fine," she murmured. "Didn't say you weren't," he replied, stepping aside. She limped toward the small window, watching sunlight spill across the white hills. "They'll think I'm dead by now," she said, almost to herself. "Who's they?" he asked. "People who should have loved me," she answered. "People who wanted me gone." He didn't press her. Instead, he reached for his rifle, checking the chamber. "Well, best they keep thinking that way." The sound of metal sliding shut echoed in the quiet. She turned, curiosity darkening her expression. "Why do you talk like a man expecting trouble?" He met her eyes, voice low. "Because trouble usually finds me before I find it." Outside, a crow called once, sharp and lonely. The day carried a strange tension, as if the storm had only shifted from sky to earth. She helped him mend a broken chair leg, her hands trembling at first but steadying under his guidance. Every movement between them felt cautious but necessary, like a language being relearned. When she accidentally cut her finger on a splinter, he reached for her hand. "Hold still." He tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it around the wound. His touch was rough, but his care was careful, almost reverent. She looked at him then, not as a rescuer but as a man carrying his own bruises. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Too many times," he admitted. "Ain't proud of most of 'em." A pause followed. She wanted to ask what ghosts haunted him but decided some answers weren't meant for daylight. Instead she asked, "What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, "Doesn't much matter anymore." "Still," she pressed gently, "I'd like to know what to call the man who saved me." He looked at her for a long moment before answering, "Call me what you want. Names don't change what we've done." She nodded, reading the weight behind that. He returned to the fire, poking the embers with the butt of his knife. "You?" he asked. Her lips parted, then closed again. "I had one once," she said softly, "but they turned it into a curse." That answer lingered between them like a faint song neither could finish. Later, as dusk approached, he stepped outside to gather more wood. The air was crisp and the snow crunched beneath his boots. He moved like a man listening to the ground. When he reached the tree-line, he froze. On the trunk of a pine, carved deep into the bark, was a symbol, a cross made of two blades. Old, familiar, and unwelcome. His pulse tightened. The last time he'd seen that mark, blood had followed. He returned to the cabin, expression unreadable. She was sitting near the fire, humming a tune too fragile for the wild. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. No need to bring fear where peace barely existed. But he cleaned his rifle that night, every motion precise, deliberate. She watched him, recognizing the ritual of a man who trusted neither night nor fate. "You expect them to come?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up. "Always expect the worst. That way I'm never surprised." She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I used to do that too. Didn't help much." He glanced at her, studying the bruise fading along her jaw, the defiance hidden beneath her calm. "Then maybe you stopped expecting the right kind of things." For a while neither spoke. The fire snapped, wind rattled the window pane, and the world outside seemed to hold its breath. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a quiet strength. "If they come," she said, "I don't want to run anymore." He looked up sharply. "You can't fight what's hunting you." "Maybe not," she said, meeting his gaze, "but I can stop being afraid of it." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "Then you'd better learn how to shoot." The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. The fire burned lower, and shadows crept across the room, shaping the two figures, one hardened by guilt, the other reborn from pain, into a fragile alliance against the dark. Outside, the first distant echo of hoofbeats rolled across the valley, soft but certain, like a warning carried on the wind. The morning began with a thin mist crawling through the valley, softening the edges of the world. The woman woke to find the cowboy already outside, his figure outlined against the pale light as he chopped wood. Each swing of the axe was deliberate, rhythmic, the sound echoing through the still air. She watched from the window, studying the strength in his movements and the silence that seemed to hang around him like a cloak. He was a man who lived without noise, whose past spoke louder than his words ever could. She stepped out quietly, the cold biting her skin. "You didn't sleep," she said. He didn't turn. Didn't need to. She looked toward the ridge where the tracks had been last night. Snow had filled them in, but the memory of danger lingered. "You think they'll come?" He paused mid-swing, breath clouding in the air. "If they're the kind I think they are, they don't quit till the job's done." "Then why stay here?" she asked. He drove the axe into the stump and leaned on it. "Because running don't change the kind of man you are. It just tells the world what you're afraid to face." His words sank deep. She knew something in him had died long before she arrived. She also knew something in her had come alive because of him. Inside the cabin, she started cooking what little they had left, cornmeal and dried beans. The smell filled the air, humble but comforting. When he came in, he looked surprised by it, as if the scent of food had become foreign. "You don't owe me this," he said, sitting down slowly. "Maybe not," she replied, "but it feels good to do something that isn't surviving." He looked at her then, really looked. The bruises had faded, leaving her skin pale but luminous in the light. Her eyes, though tired, held a steady fire. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And you're softer than you pretend," she answered, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. A silence followed, warmer than before. But it was broken by the distant crack of a branch outside. His head snapped toward the sound. In a heartbeat, he grabbed his rifle, motioning for her to stay back. He opened the door just enough to peer out. A lone horse stood beyond the trees, saddle empty, steam rising from its flanks. The tracks leading to it were fresh. He cursed under his breath. "They found us." Her heart stuttered. "What do we do?" "Pack light," he said, eyes scanning the ridge. "We move before nightfall." But when evening came, the air shifted. The wind carried the faint metallic scent of smoke, and the quiet turned heavy. He moved to the window, rifle in hand. "Too late," he muttered. The first gunshot shattered the silence, glass exploding inward. She screamed, ducking behind the table. He returned fire, the echo bouncing off the hills. "Stay low," he shouted. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, splinters flying. He shot again, hitting one figure in the snow. Another shadow darted toward the barn. He grabbed her arm. "Out the back, go." They ran into the storm-darkened field, boots sinking into the snow. The air burned with gunpowder and cold. Behind them, the cabin began to catch fire, orange light flickering across the white landscape. She turned once, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. "Everything you had." "Wasn't much to lose," he said, pushing her forward. They took shelter behind a cluster of rocks near the frozen creek. The world glowed faintly from the burning cabin behind them. He reloaded, hands shaking only slightly. "You hit?" he asked. She shook her head, though blood trickled from a graze along her arm. "You?" He ignored the question, eyes fixed on the treeline. "They'll circle. We've got minutes, maybe less." Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Why are they after me?" He hesitated, then said, "Because men like them don't need a reason." But I think your past gave him one. Her jaw tightened. You know something. He met her gaze. I heard one of them talk before he died last time I ran into that mark. Said a rancher's daughter ran from her own wedding. Said her family wanted her dead to clean their name. She stared at him, realization hitting like a blow. My father. He nodded grimly. And your husband's kin. They're the same men. The truth hung between them, heavier than the smoke drifting from the burning cabin. She looked away, fighting tears. Then I really was nothing but a curse to them. He reached out, gripping her shoulder firmly. No. You were the one thing they couldn't break, so they tried to bury you. The word steadied her. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost of someone unwanted. She felt like a flame refusing to go out. The gunfire ceased. Silence stretched again, uneasy. He rose slightly, scanning the dark. Then he froze. They're retreating, he murmured. Why? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward her with that same haunted look he'd worn since the night they met. Because they'll come back smarter. And next time, they won't just burn wood. She swallowed hard. Then teach me, she said. Teach me how to survive. He stared at her, something fierce and fragile crossing his face. You sure you're ready for that? I was ready the night they left me to die, she whispered. He nodded once, handed her his revolver. Then we start now. She held the weapon, its cold weight unfamiliar but strangely right. The fire behind them cast their shadows long across the snow. Two figures bound by the same wound, standing at the edge of everything they feared. As the last light of the burning cabin flickered out, the cowboy glanced toward the horizon where the mountains swallowed the stars. It ain't over, he said quietly. No, she replied, voice steady, it's just beginning. And for the first time, neither of them looked away from the darkness ahead. Dawn came slow, bleeding through the cracks of the mountains, spilling over the valley like molten gold. The cabin stood silent, wrapped in mist and the smell of dying embers. She woke first, her breath fogging in the pale light, her fingers brushing the rough wool blanket that smelled faintly of smoke in him. For a moment she let herself believe the world outside had forgotten them. The men, the threats, the past, but the silence had that heavy stillness before a storm. She knew it wasn't over. He was already outside, shirt sleeves rolled, splitting wood with a focus that seemed to burn through the morning chill. His scars caught the light, raised, pale lines that ran down his arm like history carved into flesh. She watched him for a moment, saw the steadiness in his movements, and felt something deep and wordless grow inside her chest. The same man who had found her half buried in snow now moved like he belonged to the earth itself, unbending, unyielding. When he looked up, their eyes met. No words passed, yet the air between them tightened with unspoken things. She stepped outside, her boots crunching frost. They won't stop, she said quietly. Men like him never do. He didn't ask who she met. He already knew. They'll try, he replied, wiping sweat from his neck. But they'll have to ride through hell to reach us. She wanted to believe him. But she had seen the way cruelty clings to certain men. It doesn't die easy, it waits for a chance to strike again. The man she'd been forced to marry wasn't one to leave a mark undone. He'd branded her shame into gossip, left her for dead, and somewhere out there, his pride still bled. That evening the wind picked up, howling through the valley like a warning. Horses whinnied in the corral, uneasy. The air smelled of rain and something sharper, gun oil perhaps. He moved with the calm precision of someone who'd lived this kind of night too many times. He loaded his rifle, checked the revolver at his hip, then looked at her. If they come, you stay low. I'll handle it. No, she said firmly. You found me dying once. I won't watch you die next. There was no room for argument. He saw it in her eyes, the same fire he'd seen that night by the river when she had fought for breath, for life. That same quiet defiance now burned steady. He gave a single nod. Then we stand together. By midnight, the rain came hard, drumming on the roof, blurring the world into a wash of silver and shadow. Lightning cracked, revealing shapes moving beyond the fence line. 3 men on horseback, their faces hidden by slick coats and soaked hats. Her heart hammered. He moved closer to the window, rifle raised, the edge of his jaw tightening. The first shot shattered the quiet. A window burst inward. She dropped to the floor as he returned fire, the recoil echoing like thunder. The air filled with gun smoke and rain. One of the attackers screamed, fell, the sound lost in the storm. Another tried to flank from the side. He moved fast, kicked open the door, stepped out into the night, mud splattering his boots. She followed, breathless, clutching a revolver that felt heavier than it should. Lightning flashed again, and she saw the man who had once called himself her husband, soaked, snarling, eyes full of madness. "You should have stayed dead," he spat. She raised her gun, hands trembling. "You should have let me live." The man lunged forward, weapon drawn, but before he could fire, the cowboy's rifle roared. The shot hit clean, throwing the man back into the mud. For a heartbeat, there was silence, broken only by the storm. Then another shot rang out from behind them, a desperate echo. The cowboy staggered, a dark bloom spreading across his shoulder. She screamed his name, caught him as he fell to one knee. He gritted his teeth, pushed her hand away. "Finish it," he said, nodding toward the last man still moving through the rain. She turned, sighted the revolver, and fired. The man dropped without a sound. The storm rolled past slowly, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and gunpowder. She pressed her hands against his wound, whispering prayers that felt like confessions. "Stay with me," she begged. "You can't leave me now." He laughed weakly, a sound rough but alive. "You talk too much," he muttered. "You're safe now. That's enough." "No," she said, tears mixing with the rain. "Safe means nothing without you." They stayed there until the thunder faded and the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon. She helped him inside, bandaged his shoulder with trembling fingers, and lit a fire that painted their faces gold. He looked at her, eyes half-lidded but still fierce. "You're stronger than I ever was," he whispered. She shook her head. "You gave me something to fight for." Days passed. The land, bruised and soaked, began to heal. So did they. He mended fences with one arm, stubborn as ever, while she tended the horses and cooked by the fire. Silence often filled the cabin, but it wasn't empty. It was peace, the kind they'd both forgotten how to live in. One evening, when the sky burned orange and violet, he stood beside her on the porch, watching the light fade. The scar on his shoulder had healed into a dark line. She reached out, touched it gently, and said, "You saved me." He smiled faintly. "You saved me first." The wind moved softly across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a lone hawk circled, free and untethered. She leaned against him, the rough fabric of his coat warm under her cheek. For the first time she didn't feel ugly, cursed, or lost. She felt chosen, by fate, by pain, by the strange mercy that had brought them together. When night came, they sat by the fire, neither speaking, just listening to the crackle of wood and the quiet hum of crickets. He reached over, took her hand, and whispered, "Guess heaven ain't in the sky after all." She smiled, eyes glinting in the firelight. "No," she said softly. "It's right here." Outside, the stars stretched wide across the black sky, and the wind carried the faint echo of their laughter. The story would end there for most, but for those listening by the campfire, it lived on, whispered from heart to heart across the plains, about a bride left to die and the cowboy who saw heaven beneath a sack. And if you're still listening, stranger, remember, sometimes the wildest lands grow the gentlest hearts. So if this tale stirred something in you, tip your hat, share the fire, and ride with us again. The West always has another story waiting.